you guys doing?
Yeah.
I personally want to thank you immensely for coming to support these two phenomenal scholars.
Yeah.
And also for being part of history. So this is the first ever American Literature Lecture Series, and hopefully not the last. So we do thank you for your support. Without further ado, I just want to tell you guys a little bit about the project they're doing. I teach the American Literature class here, from basically the foundation, or the founding of New America to the Civil War. And Jennifer Bird and Seth Cardin came to me, very courageously might I add, and said, we'd like to do your work plus a whole lot more. So what you guys are about to see is a product of their incredible amount of work they've done alongside the curriculum that I offered in a regular class. Seth Cardin is going to start us off with a presentation on Charles Brockden Brown, and then we'll segue into Jennifer Bird's presentation on Edgar Allan Poe.
All right, well, yeah, guys, thanks a lot, all of you, for coming down today. If you guys can't hear me in the back, just throw something at me. So, yeah, thank you very much for being here. I also wanted to thank the Honors Committee for letting Jen and I go ahead and do these projects. I want to thank Rachel for all her help throughout this process. I want to thank Brian and everybody else who helped promote this. Brian's been great. He's the guy eating food like always. He's been kind of our own hype man. You know, we had our own Flav. So that's been pretty cool. But so when Jim and I sat down and started talking about these honors projects, and we've both been fascinated with horror from way too early of ages, and we really felt like there was something to be said about it. We really felt like, as a literary form, why is horror worth looking at? And it doesn't seem like anybody examines horror as a legitimate expression in literature. So we chose a couple of authors, and you know what followed was some pretty awesome stuff. So we're going to try and cram a whole bunch of stuff in to the next hour for you guys. So first of all, talking about Charles Brockden Brown, has anybody here ever even heard of the guy? Anyone? I see one hand. Okay, before we started promoting this lecture, because speaking for me, I hadn't heard of this guy up until about 4 or 5 months ago. It was actually Jen who brought him to my attention. And as I started studying him, I became absolutely fascinated with not only his work, but who he was as a person, and certainly his lifetime from a historical perspective is really intriguing. So let's see here. He was the initial torchbearer in America for horror, and it was a horror that addressed things. He took horror to the next level and kind of forced people to look at the issues that he thought were necessary to look at in America. So let's see. So what he did was he not only was he our founding American novelist, he was also the person who created the American Gothic. And to understand the American Gothic, I need to show you guys real quick just where he drew his inspiration from. And then as I move through the rest of my time up here, kind of keep in mind what the English Gothic is all about. So in 1764, a man named Horace Walpole wrote a book called The Castle of Otranto. Any critic today will tell you that the book is not very exciting, but what he did was he took kind of the older medieval conventions of supernatural romance, combined them with his contemporary romance stories, which were, you know, kind of this pining, unrequited love, and he combined the two and set them in medieval times, and that's where the term Gothic literature gets its name from, is the Gothic literature found in his book. Now, it was Anne Radcliffe who was publishing. She published about 20 or so years after Walpole. She was publishing in the 1780s and 90s, and she really took the form and ran with it. Her books are still celebrated today. They have very rich plot, very rich characters, intriguing, mystery-centered plots. And the big thing with the Gothic is it's all about the themes and it's all about the elements. We've got a couple, I mean, there's a whole laundry list of themes, almost to the point where the Gothic becomes kind of a cliche in itself. But especially in this time frame, you know, you have these big distant castles, other remote areas, dungeons, crypts, catacombs. You have to have the passion-driven villains. And, of course, the flawed anti-heroes and the damsels always faint. So, Radcliffe really saw a big distinction between horror and terror. And I have a quick quote I want to read from her real quick to kind of give you guys an idea of where she was coming from. She said, "Terror and horror are so far opposite that the first expands the soul and awakens the faculties to a high degree of life. The other contracts, freezes, and nearly annihilates them. I apprehend that neither Shakespeare nor Milton, by their fictions, anywhere looked to positive horror as a source of the sublime, though they all agree that terror is a very high one, and where lies the great difference between horror and terror, but in the uncertainty and obscurity that accompany the first, respecting the dreaded evil." So, Radcliffe was all about the terror. And really what she's saying here is the terror is the buildup, it's the anticipation. It's, you know, what is lurking around the corner in the dark, you know, what's down in the dungeon. And really the horror comes after you find out what it is, and there's blood and guts and screaming and all these things. So again, as I move through here, keep this in mind and what Brown ends up doing to make it uniquely American. And also I want you to keep two other authors in mind, Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin, who were both very prolific writers in Britain. Not necessarily writing in the Gothic form so much as, again, amongst many other things. They used fiction as a form to make very real social points, political points, religious points. They used fiction as opposed to political pamphlets or what have you to get it to the masses. So keep those guys in mind as well. So Charles Brockden Brown. Sorry for the very wordy slide here. I don't know if there's any public speaking teachers here that would matter. So Charles Brockden Brown is born on January 17, 1771 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And so right from the get-go, his life is very interesting because he's born to Quaker parents. And then on top of that, the Revolutionary War starts when he's 4 years old. Now his parents being Quakers, they were pacifists. His father, what's his name? Anyways, it's up there somewhere in all those words. Elijah. He gets arrested when Charles is 6 years old. And it was the Continental Congress had formed an ad hoc committee that went after people that they believed were spies or responsible for some kind of subversion. So they come to the Brown estate. They kind of lived in the more rural outskirts of Philadelphia. And young Charles sees his father get arrested and hauled off. And this greatly affects him. Because his dad, you know, he wasn't against, you know, he supported, you know, the new government and what they were trying to do. He just didn't want to be involved. You know, he's a pacifist. He didn't want to get caught up in all this stuff. He had a family to raise. So that stayed with Charles for his life. At age 11, he goes into Philadelphia and starts his education at the Friends Latin School, and he ends up under the tutelage of a British loyalist Quaker named Robert Proud. And Robert Proud, you know, he really brings Charles out of his shell. He encourages him to think. He encourages him to question everything from faith to politics, you know, social constructs, things of this nature. And not necessarily to radically rebel against them, which Brown ends up kind of doing anyway, but just to be a thinking man. And during these same years, while he's getting his education, he forms the, I don't know how to say it, the Bell Letters Club. And it's just a bunch of young intellectuals in Philadelphia so he's hanging out talking about philosophy and religion and government, becoming very well-rounded. Okay, so he finishes up in 1787, and so his parents want him to become a lawyer. So kind of reluctantly, he goes to law school and he gets an apprenticeship. And it does not take very long at all for him. I'm not exaggerating when I say the guy absolutely loathed the law and everything that it stood for. He thought that it was just a bunch of crooks, and I think he was probably right. But during this time, he's very critical of the Constitution. He said, "Hey, it's great, now all the rich white landowning males have their representation. But what about the women? What about the non-whites? And what about the poor? And where's their vehicle to be able to enjoy this life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that we're talking about with this document?" So he finally leaves the law behind in 1793. He had been a writer for most of his young life, and decided in 1793 that that's what he wants to do. So he quits the law, and in this time he begins making new friends, intellectual friends in New York. And so between 1793 and 1798, he's going back and forth between Philadelphia and New York, and especially visiting with his friend, Dr. Elihu Smith, Smith. And he's writing all of this stuff, tons and tons of it, but he's not doing anything with it. He's not really publishing it. And he's getting very disheartened. He can't find his voice. He can't figure out how to talk about the things he wants to talk about. And it really wears on him to the point where he wants to quit. Well, it's Smith who really encourages him to keep doing it, to stick with it, to see what happens. And he does. So he officially moves to New York in the summer of 1798, right when the yellow fever outbreak is hitting New York City. And it's all over the place, and it's killing people, and it's horrible. And so Smith, being a doctor, begins treating people. He teaches Brown some of the tricks of the trade, and Brown even jumps in and he's trying to help out. And it ends up both Brown and Smith get very, very ill. Brown survives, Smith does not. Smith dies. And so this is a watershed moment for Brown. It's the straw that broke the camel's back. Up to this point, he had seen so much Charles had between his father being taken away, the repression that they faced from the young government, the kind of religious fanaticism that was all over the place, the sin and vice that he saw in the cities. And so when Smith dies, he's like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to sit down and write. And that's what he does. And he ends up in an 18-month period writing and publishing 4 novels. 4 novels. So yeah, and keep in mind, Smith died in the summer of 1798, and Brown publishes his first book in September. So this happens very fast, and he just starts pouring this work out. So I want to bring up his 4 Gothic novels. He wrote 7 of them, but the 4 Gothic novels that he wrote in that 18-month period are really what I want to talk about, and I only really have time to focus on one of them, but I will talk about the common themes throughout them. So his first novel was Wyland in 1798, and there was Ormond, Arthur Mervyn, and Edgar Huntley, all in 1799. Like I said, these books had common themes. There was murder, suicide, adultery, attempted rape, theft, fraud, sleepwalking, epidemics, Indian battles, and yes, there is even a panther attack. Now here's one big distinction between Brown and his English influences, is he really focuses on violence in all of his books. He focuses on the violence, he focuses on the vice, and he was doing it to make a point. He was doing it because whether it really instilled fear or it just shocked people, it lingered, it stuck with them. It made them think, and God forbid, maybe even got them to start talking. So, let's see. again, Brown uses his fiction to address social, political, and religious ills of America and the things that he had seen and experienced. And then, so here on this list, we have his father in prison, lingering Puritan influences of guilt and sin, which were still huge at the end of the 17th century. The Indian threats and the representation of the unknown, the rationality and sensationalism caused by religion, again, the sin advice in the cities, and also interference still by the authorities. So I want to read to you guys a real quick part from Wyland, his first novel, just to give you a very, very brief idea of what the plot is about. It's about a grown brother and sister who live on the same family estate together. The brother is married, the sister lives in a little outbuilding on the estate. And one day this mysterious guy, Cardin, shows up, and it turns out that this guy, Cardin, is a biloquist. That is, he's a ventriloquist, but he can throw his voice and he can mimic people's voices. Okay, so it's kind of an interesting plot device, but we're going to run with it. Not long after Cardin shows up, Theodore Wyland, the main character, starts hearing voices. In fact, it's the voice of God, or at least he believes it is, that the voice tells him as much. And the voice proceeds to tell Wyland that he needs to kill his wife and his children. So this part I'm going to read you is Wyland talking. And there's a little bit of dialogue between him and his wife. This is the part where he kills him. So he says, "I brought thee hither to fulfill a divine command. I am appointed the destroyer, and to destroy thee I must." Saying this, I seized her wrist. She shrieked aloud and endeavored to free herself from my grasp, but her efforts were in vain. "Surely, surely, Wyland, thou dost not mean it. Am I not thy wife, and wouldst thou kill me? Thou wilt not, and yet I see. Thou art Wyland no longer. A fury resistless and horrible possesses me. Spare me, help." Till her breath was stopped, she shrieked for help, for mercy. When she could speak no longer, her gestures, her looks appealed to my compassion. My accursed hand was irresolute and tremulous. I meant thy death to be sudden, thy struggles to be brief. Alas, my heart was infirm, my resolves mutable. Thrice I slackened my grasp, and life kept its hold, though in the midst of pangs. Her eyeballs started from their sockets. Grimness and distortion took place of all that used to bewitch me into transport and subdue me into reverence. So 1798, guys, and he's writing with such vivid and colorful language, and I've got part of it up here. And again, that is going to stick with you more than what someone like Anne Radcliffe in the English Gothic tradition pretty much would have stopped after the first sentence and moved on. She wanted to stick with the terror. Brown was like, no, I want to make a point here. So again, he wants his readers to be aware of really the straitjacket that this religious fanaticism places on a rational and free-thinking mind. He's also addressing, everybody's seen like NCIS or CSI or any of those other initial cop drama shows. He took an actual case that had happened, obviously, when he was a young boy. But a man in upstate New York was overcame by natural feelings to fulfill a divine command to murder his family, which he ended up doing. So Brown is, and in his other books, I wish I had time to talk about them, but in all of them, he is using the American Gothic, which he has taken the old themes of the English Gothic, the castles and the dungeons and so on and so forth, and made them uniquely American. Of course, he had no castles to place his novels in. He wanted to keep them realistic. So he placed them in the cities where he addressed the sin and the vice and the decadence. He placed them in the wilderness. Keep in mind, he's in Philadelphia on the coast of the eastern seaboard, but even back then, 1798, the wilderness is hardly more than a stone's throw to the west at this point. And I can only imagine that it would be, just the thought of it would be scary, those woods. But then when you add in all the paranoia, these looming Indian attacks, that can be quite frightening. And in his book, Edgar Allan Poe, he uses that fear of the wilderness to address how the Native Americans have been treated even at that point. Again, if I had more time, I would address that. So just to finish up his biography, in 1800 he returns to Philadelphia to help with the family business, and really ends up distancing himself from novel writing and even the works themselves that he created to try and affect this social change. Instead, his writing is focused more on editing, journalism, and published a lot of political pamphlets that were highly critical of the government. In 1803, he marries Elizabeth Lind, and she's a Presbyterian. Her brother is a prominent Presbyterian minister, and he makes a pretty radical change and becomes a pretty devout Christian in the last years of his life. You know, you look at how critical he was of religion, and he wasn't against it. He wasn't against religion, but he thought it was absurd and preposterous that people would buy things so easily and allow these things to take them really into madness, death, murder, things like this. So I find that pretty interesting. Again, critical of the government. Used to be a fan of Jefferson, not a fan of Jefferson anymore once Jefferson became president. And then in February of 1810, he dies at 39 of tuberculosis in Philadelphia, where he was born. And he left a lot of unfinished work. So to wrap it up, he definitely had a long-lasting legacy that carried through the 1800s. And then he disappeared because of his writing style, which I've had the pleasure of reading a fair amount of it at this point. For those of you guys in English class with me, we know how some of these old authors can be very, very wordy, and muddling through a paragraph is torture, just trying to figure out what the guy is trying to say. But so critics kind of nailed him for that. They nailed him for leaving plot holes open and weak characters, things like this. But it hasn't been until the last 30 years or so that the Brown scholarship has kind of been rediscovered. And in the past 3 decades is when people have said, "Holy crap!" He was talking to the America that he lived in. I mean, he took the idea. I mean, he could have just written stories for story's sake, right? Like Radcliffe and Walpole before him, that did nothing more than tell a hopefully entertaining story. But instead, Brown used this mode of American Gothic to drive home the points that he wanted to address. He wanted people to talk. He wanted people to be aware. He wanted to start conversation. So I think it is interesting his complete 180-degree turn at about the year 1800. But nonetheless, he goes on to inspire such writers as Melville and his Gothic tales. Certainly Hawthorne, and we know how Hawthorne felt about the Puritans and very Americanized ideas of guilt and sin as viewed through the puritanical lens. Edgar Allan Poe, who Jim will be talking about here shortly. Poe even said, and this is a quote from him, he said that Brown was among American writers of the less generally circulated, but more worthy and more artistical fictions. And I have Mary Shelley up there too. Of course, she is not American, she's British, but as she was writing both Frankenstein and The Last Man, she reread Brown's Gothic fictions as she was doing that for inspiration. And then she goes on, if you talk to any literature people these days, they'll tell you that Frankenstein is one of the first, if not the first, science fiction story. Of course, she wrote it as a horror story. I have her up there just to show that his influences went over the ocean. His influences went back to the same place where he drew inspiration from in the first place. So I think that that's really cool. So to wrap up, I just want to say that, again, Brown wanted to remind us that we live today, as much today as in his own day, that we live in two Americas. The one America that's lionized and celebrated and held up, and the other being kind of the darker side, the one that we try to ignore and forget and sweep under the rug. Not only was he our first published American novelist, but he was one of the first to call for social change and awareness in America. and pointed out that there is always a dark undercurrent going through our country, whether it be in his America, the late 1700s and early 1800s, all the way up to today. We can forget that we have a somewhat dark past very easily, I think. And Brown was saying the same thing. So, I don't know, guys, I guess with that, I am going to wrap it up. Thank you very much for listening.
So I have an opposite question, sort of, and that the answer is going to be different. How many of you have heard of Edgar Allan Poe? What do you think? How do you know about Poe? It's poetry, right? Once Upon a Midnight Dreary. Today I'm going to talk about his short stories and in specific his horror. I was told that I should tell a joke to kind of ease myself into this, but it's really hard to come up with a joke while you're standing here. I think the computer's going to give us enough problems. While the computer misbehaves, we'll start with Poe. Poe was born in 1809 to actor parents, David and Elizabeth Poe. His father actually left them quite early, and his mother died when he was 3 of tuberculosis. His siblings went to different locations. His older brother went to live with his paternal grandparents. Poe was given to the Allens, a wealthy merchant family from Richmond, Virginia. And his sister, Rosalie, also stayed in Virginia. I'm not real sure where she went. The Poe family is notorious for being not very well documented. During his life, which was very brief, he died in 1849 of mysterious circumstances. He was not very popular. Poe was the guy who would come up to you and go, "That thing you wrote, that's terrible, and let me tell you why." Very in your face, very unforgiving, very much a taskmaster when it came to his belief that what we wrote as Americans should be unique and artistic. It should be original. One of his biggest kerfluffles in history was the Longfellow War. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was very popular with the public, very popular in literary circles, because he wrote these beautifully lyrical poems, these long, wonderful pieces, and Poe hated it. Poe said, "Well, congratulations, you've taken all the good things that the Brits are doing, and you stole them. Good job on that." And people didn't like being called plagiarists, go figure. So they didn't like him for that. He looked at Emerson and the Transcendentalists and he said, "What are you guys doing? You're wordy for wordy's sake, you're obscure, it's mysticism, you do nothing but talk in metaphors. Why should I listen to you? You're not doing anything new." So, of course, the Transcendentalists were a big thing during his day and they didn't like that. Fenimore, who wrote Last of the Mohicans, he criticized Fenimore's diction. He's like, you should use this word instead of that word. That word you used, it doesn't work there. One of the few people that they say he really loved was Elizabeth Browning Barrett from England. And even on her works, he was kind of even-handed about it. He was like, this is really lovely. He referred to her as one of the best poets of their time, but he still called her obscure and didactic. And didactic, of course, is trying to teach a lesson. It's the PSA at the end of your story. Poe hated this. He's like, if you're going to write a story, create a piece of art. Tell a story and make it good. Let's see if my technology works with me here. So within his critical work, Poe pretty much summed up and created the form and the rules that would be used to create short stories. Pretty much, we even do it today. There are colleges who hold courses specifically on the short story theory of Edgar Allan Poe. And when I went through and I read it, some people break it down into 5, some people break it into 6, and I came up with really 3 things that he did. He said, be brief. He said, there's no reason to add more words for word's sake. Just get to the point. He said, if you're going to tell a short story, his exact words, that it needs to be read in one sitting. He says, pursue a single effect, which means if you want to scare someone, scare them. Every word that you use, leave out the fluff, every word you should use should pursue that effect. These were his theories, and he loved Hawthorne as an American writer. He really endorsed Hawthorne because he felt that Hawthorne's works enveloped this idea of art. What he didn't like was everyone else patting each other on the back and going, oh, good job on that story. Here, you review my story well in your paper, I'll review your story well in mine. Poe didn't get a lot of that from his peers because he didn't pat the backs. He didn't play the game, and they said forget it. They also tended not to like the fact that he would publish stories in newspapers as real stories, and then they'd find out they weren't real. So Poe was actually quite a prankster in that regard. Now this set him up for never being taken seriously, which is where we come to his horror. He wrote a lot of satire about the other authors of his day. He wrote a lot of hoaxes. He wrote a little bit of science fiction. He created a detective story. But in his horror, he explored something different than the transcendentalists were looking for. You had Emerson say, go out into the world. Find that divine spark, whether it's God, whether it's nature, whatever it is, find that divine spark. Bring it into yourself, explore the good, and bring it back to us, and help make America great. And Poe said, that doesn't work. That's not real. You can't do that. Poe said, you're looking at America as this hopeful ideal, this land of prosperity and indulgence and just wonderful stuff. And Poe says, no, that's not America. Poe grew up, his mother, his stepmother, his older brother, and eventually his wife all died of tuberculosis. He lives in poverty for pretty much his entire life, and in a hostile environment, which he's kind of helped to build because he has principles. Not to mention, during his life, 1837 was the Great Panic of 1837, where we basically fell into a 7-year depression when the banks collapsed. They speculated on gold rushes and all sorts of market-type things, and when they didn't pan out, our economy fell apart. Major industries closed, literary magazines just disappeared. So Poe said, no, I challenge that this is not a land of prosperity. This is a land that is horrible, terrible, and it will take your money, and it will take your family, and it will take your loves, it will take your passions, and leave them in a gutter, wearing someone else's clothes, which, by the way, was how they found Poe in October of 1849. He didn't even have the dignity to die in his own suit. Can you believe that? So he took the Gothic tale, and he challenged the idea that Gothic terror was European. He says, no, this is ours, and we have it. This terror, this horror, this is inside of us. He did away with one of the favorite endings in the Gothic narrative, which is what I call the Scooby-Doo ending. The monster is unmasked as being a man. The voices that Wyland hears is just a ventriloquist. You know, everything is summed up. Yeah, some people died, but someone at the end gets to go off and live their life. Poe said, no. There are terrible paths in this world, and once you go down them, there's no coming back. He defied the hero's journey. Or he said, sure, the hero goes down, and the hero comes back up, but the hero is not a hero anymore. The hero is a broken man. I feel that this is an important message in fiction, because this is something we never look at as people. You know, we all go through something, and on the other side, you're not the same. And sometimes you don't bring back the answer. Sometimes you don't come back with the potion to heal all ills. Sometimes it's just done. You're done. And I think that there's all of us at some point in our lives can relate to that. And in Poe's horror, you find these things. But more specifically, you find it inward. Poe takes the estate-ranging adventure of horror and he brings it inside. He says, no, this is your neighbor, this is you. This is you, and these are the things that you experience. One of my first main examples, we'll talk about a few of his pieces, is The Pit and the Pendulum. And if you've never read The Pit and the Pendulum, it's fantastic, and you should read it. It's about a man who's been taken prisoner by the Spanish Inquisition. And the only part of the story that you get to hear, you don't know why he's there, you don't know who he is, you don't know how they captured him. It's his experience in this pit. It's him feeling his way around the inside. It's him realizing when someone just happens to leave the door open a moment too long and he sees this giant pit into which he's almost fallen. It's him strapped to this board while rats are eating his food and this pendulum is slowly, one swing at a time, getting closer, and his horror that he feels. And at the end, he's saved. But do you really think that he'll ever be the same after being locked in a metal pit, which, by the way, they set on fire? They were going to cook him or make him fall into the hole. It's kind of, I don't think he can recover from that too well. So he, in the story, he narrows your narrative to me. It's all in first person. I couldn't see anything. I felt my way around the edges. I looked down into the pit and I couldn't see the bottom. It was that great fear of the unknown. And I think Poe is speaking to these moments where we look into this gaping pit in front of us and go, this is pretty horrible where I'm at, but I don't know what's down there. I don't know what's going on down there. And that's a little scarier, and it elicits a sympathy with your reader. And one of the lines from my paper actually is, escape for the narrator means escape for the reader. So the only point at which you get relief in your story is when the narrator gets away. And I think that's a very powerful tool that Poe's peers and even critics today still kind of disregard horror without looking at how these tools are used. And then we come to the Cask of Amontillado, which deals in moral decay. Poe really was faced with moral decay in his system, the literati of New York and the North. When you walk up to somebody and go, I wrote this real piece of crap, but I want you to publish it and tell everyone it's great. And Poe's like, but it's not great. How can you put your name on there saying it's great? So he's watching the world just kind of fall apart around him in regards to his passion. So you have moral decay. And two of the facets of moral decay that he addresses in the Cask of Amontillado is revenge and justification. The first line of the Cask of Amontillado is, 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I have borne. I'm not going to get this right. But it's 1,000, I'll tell you what, I'll pull it up. He basically says that he's borne 1,000 injuries from, let's try this one more time. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. So it's a man pushed to the edge of his tolerance for this. He vows revenge, but he justifies everything he does to this poor guy, which is he tricks him through Fortunato's boastfulness. He tricks him into his own death, leads him down into his basement, chains him to a wall, walls him up, tosses the torch in as a final touch, and then leaves him there. Whether he burns to death, he dies. But Montresor is completely justifying this to himself. He says, no, he insulted me, he injured me 1,000 times over, and so what I'm doing is just fine. It's fine. I think we see that a lot today within our own world, people going, yeah, that's not really nice, the thing I did, but they had it coming. They deserved it. And that's how you make yourself feel better. There are hints in the Cask of Amontillado of guilty conscience. It kind of shows up just here and there where he pauses and he goes, oh, I heard him shriek and I hesitated, but he doesn't stop him. You still just go ahead with it because he deserved it, didn't he? So it's too late for the reader in this story who sided with Montresor. It's like, that's right, that guy's a jerk. And look at what a jerk he is in the whole story. Because several times the narrator says, no, let us turn back. Let's go back. You'll be cold, you'll be ill, you're not doing well. Let's turn around. But Fortunato's like, no, that other guy doesn't know anything about wine. Let me taste it. And he pretty much boastfulnesses himself. He brags himself into his own grave. And so the reader's like, yeah, until you get to the end and you realize he just murdered him. And then you're like, oh, did I just agree that was the right thing to do? Poe explores deeper into the concepts of moral decay. The Black Cat. The common theme throughout these stories is they are first person. In The Black Cat, there's a man who has a cat, and he kind of goes through, there's corruption, he drinks, he is come upon by the imp of the perverse, which is sort of a metaphysical definition that Poe came up with to describe these urges that you get inside. You know, you go outside, you get in your car, there's dog crap on your sidewalk, and you step in and you're like, oh, I'm gonna kill that dog. It's a moment, it's there, it's gone. Poe calls that the imp of the perverse, and many of his characters give in to these darker impulses. The narrator of The Black Cat is one of them. He has a wife, he lives in a nice neighborhood, he goes drinking with his friends. So again, Poe has brought this into your more familiar neighborhood. This is your buddy next door, who one day comes home at night and he thinks the cat has slighted him by not wanting to be petted, so he gouges out its eye. And then when the cat continues to avoid him, he gets more angry. Why is the cat avoiding me? I know I poked out his eye, but come on, he's my cat. And he hangs him. And he describes hanging this cat with tears of remorse streaming down his face. It's like, yeah, I feel bad for what I did, but not bad enough to stop. Which is great and all until a second cat shows up. And he becomes convinced that this cat is the spirit of the first cat that's come to make him pay back for the ill deed he's done. And it just so happens that he decides he's going to kill the cat one day while he's out with his wife doing errands, and they're checking something in the basement. He goes to axe murder the cat, but his wife stops him. And just as clean as that, he axe murders his wife instead. While in the entire story, he's been so worked up about his feelings about this cat. Murdering his wife is no big deal. It's just a thing he does. He's very tidy about it, chops her up, hides her inside the wall. Familiar, right? I think Poe had to think about hiding people in walls. So he hides her in the wall, and the thing that gives him away is that somehow he's walled the cat inside. He doesn't realize that. He's just relieved the cat is gone. No feelings about his wife. She's in the. I don't have to worry about her body. She's in the wall. That's great. These walls are sturdy and fantastic. He says these things. Just as a matter of fact, his wife's dead, but thank God the cat's gone. The cat gives him away. And you know, you see this skewed set of perceptions kind of leaking into your narrator. You know, it's the corruption, the anger, the fear, the madness. It's just not right. The cat is the bigger concern, not, oh, I just killed my wife. No big deal. You know, that's, like I said, there's no horror expressed here on the relief of being free of a second cat. Oh. So my last piece I want to talk about actually just goes the rest of the way down the rabbit hole. The narrator of The Telltale Heart is completely insane. And he wants you to know that he's not. He wants to assure you that everything he's about to say is perfectly reasonable. Perfectly reasonable. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I have been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? This disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. I had no desire for his gold. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Perfectly natural, right? That eye freaks him out. He's got to get rid of it. This narrator is probably the most frightening of Poe's narrators in his horror. But he's really not that unusual when you start looking into modern day psychology. He's representative of pretty much the guys we find headlining the news as serial killers, or murderers in general who have not fallen into a fit of passion. They're calculated, it just makes sense to them that they're going to perform this terrible act. So he's paranoid. He's convinced that eye is out to get him. Toward the end of the story, he's also convinced that the old man's heart is beating, and that though the cops are sitting in his room, which he set on a table and chairs for them to take their ease, right on the spot where he's hidden the body in the floorboards, he can hear the heartbeat. And he believes that they can hear it too, and that they're laughing and joking, they're just making fun of him. Because surely they hear it, surely. But he rationalizes everything he's done. And the most terrifying aspect of this particular narrator is his complete lack of morals. He's a complete sociopath. He has no regard for human life whatsoever. His biggest concern when disposing of the old man is whether his neighbors have heard the old man cry out. And of course, that's a practical matter, isn't it? My own quote says it all, doesn't it? So, over this grand scheme of literature, Poe's overlooked, it's thrown to the side, nobody really looks at it, but there are tons of authors in this world who are inspired and influenced by Poe, not only his short story form, but his horror in specific. In fact, there's a Mystery Writers of America is a group that awards, they started awarding just for mysteries because mysteries are fantastic, aren't they? But they give out the Edgar Award. And this is based mostly on his creation of the detective story. But they've expanded to include his horror, and this is one of the books they published in 2009 on Poe's 200th birthday. And they found essays, and there are essays in this book from several authors who are inspired by him. Sue Grafton, I don't remember any of her titles, it's just the mysteries that start with, A for a word that starts with A. Stephen King, Jan Berg, Lawrence Block, lots of people. And perhaps one of our most well-known horror writers today is Stephen King. And King, while perusing and pursuing those who have been influenced by King, or by Poe, I found this poem that Stephen King published in 1985 in his book Skeleton Crew, called Paranoid, a Chant. Now keeping in mind what I just read to you from The Telltale Heart. In the rain at the bus stop, black crows and black umbrellas pretend to look at their watches, but it's not raining. Their eyes are silver dollars, silver scholars, in the pay of the FBI. Most are foreigners who pour through our streets. I fooled them. Got off the bus at 25th and Lex, where a cabbie watched me over his newspaper. In a room above me, an old woman has put an electric suction cup on her floor. It sends out rays through my light fixture. Now I write in the dark, where the bar signs glow. I tell you I know. I read this and I was like, that is The Telltale Heart. What's even more interesting is if you ask Stephen King what two pieces of fiction, or what pieces of fiction scare him, he lists two: The Telltale Heart and Lord of the Flies. And the thing that those share is the unraveling of human morals in extreme situations. There's no going back after some of those things. Can you imagine The Lord of the Flies or any of those stories going back to a normal life after that? And I feel that as Seth has discussed over the course of both of our presentations, that these are the things that horror has to offer everyone. It's not just the trash read late at night, to scare you. There's something more going on, and it's the things that scare us that maybe we should be looking at. I didn't use my cards. I think that pretty much brings us to the end. So now we will indulge your questions if you have any and try our best to answer them. No promises.
I noticed on the photo of Charles Brockden Brown's book that there was the imprint of the publisher was a British publisher. Were both these authors published overseas and then their books sold here? Were they more popular in England, say, than here? Or is there no publishing industry here?
It's funny, as Jen and I were talking about, if you were a struggling author back in those days, send your stuff to France. They'll publish it and they'll eat it up. And it's true for both of our authors. In Brown's lifetime, he was actually translated into German. So yeah, he certainly. Keep in mind, Shelley wrote Frankenstein was at 18 teens, 18, 17, 18, 18. So yeah, the work was there, it was available. And that wasn't the first time she had read it. She went back through it when she sat down to write. So, certainly for Brown, he did enjoy, he was moderately successful here. He wasn't really paying the rent, so to speak. But he was known, and he was at least as popular overseas, if not more, than he was here.
Poe's poetry was fairly decently read in Britain because he had established, when you read The Raven, you get the lyrical beat. You can't read The Raven wrong. You just can't do it. So that was pretty popular in Britain, but he wasn't really largely published anywhere until Charles Baudelaire. It's French. Until Charles Baudelaire picked up his work, and he became huge posthumously in France. Like he said to him have inspired the symbolists, but he became really big in France, and it wasn't until the French were like, "Hey, America, you're not claiming this guy. Why? He's brilliant." And then slowly over the last while, we've started picking up scholarship here, and we've pretty much found out that a lot of the stuff biographically that's published about Poe is pretty much bogus.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes, as a writer and filmmaker, I think about this a lot. What do you think would be the ideal expression of the American Gothic in a contemporary setting?
That's a really good question.
What would be the ideal expression of the American Gothic in a contemporary setting, this time and place that we are here right now?
Or do you mean it as far as just a physical location is concerned?
Setting would be important, but in terms of like narrative devices, themes, translating this into the current time and place with its own problems, its own questions that need to be addressed, its own madnesses.
Well, I think that you being a writer, there's certainly a lot of wiggle room. As I said, in Brown's time, certainly in Poe's time, and definitely in our time, like I said earlier, the Gothic as a genre is almost kind of this parodied cliche of itself, because we can look at almost any piece of fiction, whether it be short stories or novels or certainly film and plays and things like this, where you are going to find some arm of Gothic fiction has weaseled its way in there. I would say, a big thing with that would be your character and how screwed up are you going to make the person. And like Jen was saying, once you start going down that road, where's that point where you have to stop before redemption is no longer an option? You know what I mean? So, and then beyond that, wherever you want to set it, you can set it. Do these external forces, whether it be the place where they live or the people they know, the things that they've experienced, and how evil these things might be as they act upon the character, is completely up to the creator. It's up to you as a writer. I don't know, do you have anything?
I would argue that we actually see aspects of the Gothic narrative in modern day movies, and a lot of the storytelling. The easiest way, of course, if you want to go Poe's route of madness and moral decay, is you go right to the asylum. And we've got several movies that kind of do that. I would argue, whether you liked Prometheus or not, the sci-fi film, or even if you go back, horror it's a very fine line between the two, science fiction and horror. If you're doing science fiction, right, science is scary. It's amazing, but it can be scary. Event Horizon, Lawrence Fishburne and Sam Neill. You remove them from their comfort zone, because a lot of Gothic stories are set out. For America, we adapted into the swamps and the plantations in the South in a lot of cases. But you take your characters to space. You can't get a whole lot more isolated than that. And then you explore, and you have your hero, who is a hero regardless. I mean, they're the good guy. There's always the anti-hero who's like, well, I'm here, but I don't want to be, but I better do the right thing because it's the right thing, or because somebody's paying me. And typically, there's almost always a female character who needs saved at some point or another. Even in Prometheus, where your doctor was supposed to be the empowered woman, you know, it got a little fainty in there several times. But I would argue that it's present in a lot of our modern media. So you could, like I said, you could pretty much go with anything. And I'd love to see a new take on it somehow, but I'm not sure that I, right at this moment, see particularly a new way that hasn't been exploited in some genre yet, in some medium.
Did I get anywhere close to answering your questions?
I think you've supplied a lot. Thank you.
I might be able to add to that. A book I released last April called The Night Strangers by Chris O'Shalian, I think. And it's all the elements of the classic Gothic horror tale stuck in modern New Hampshire. It's very good.
Any more questions? Anything, I promise we'll try to answer it. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Oh, Christopher, thank you.
When are we going to be having more of these lectures?
That's a good question. I now plan on asking to do another project next semester. Speaking of which, this is a recruitment call. We're going to need more people to sign up for American Lit 2 next semester so that the class will run, so that I can do another paper, so that I can maybe do another lecture. You know, that helps.
Thank you for that plug. Okay, I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to support, like I said, these phenomenal scholars. If you're a student, you're heading into final exam week, I hope this was a sample of your potential and what you two are capable of, because I can think of really no greater representation than what you just witnessed. And if you're a faculty member, I know that we're tired. And we have a week left of instruction, another week left of grading. But I also wanted to inspire you through their presentation to say it is worth it. And this is, again, Exhibit A. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.